Okay, so here we are. We are live on YouTube again. Thanks everybody for joining. Welcome. This is the first session of our Here For You campaign week. And as we said, oh, 2 seconds, I was just getting some feedback there. Apologies for that. So yes, this is the first session of our Here For You campaign week. The campaign week is to raise awareness of the helpline, and I'm delighted to say that we've been joined by some of the helpline staff, Sam, Kat, the manager of the helpline, and some of the helpline volunteers as well, who are going to tell you all about the work that they do and what's involved working on the helpline and some of the calls they take as well. So Sam, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to our helpline team. We have got Julie, Ruth, Helen, and Tony and Lucy with us this morning. A couple of them have been with us since the start. We did our first initial training in York just over 2.5 years ago, nearly 3 years ago, this March actually. Seems like an age ago. And then we've had Julie and Tony join us last and Helen in the middle. So we've all got a lot of experience. So what I'd like to do to talk to you, we're all going to talk to you a little bit about the calls we take, about the PMART service and the telephone support service. But initially, we're going to introduce ourselves and tell us a little bit about why we're a volunteer team and why we joined the helpline. So first of all, I'm Sam Catt and I look after the helpline volunteers. I'm also a regional manager for the north of England and Cumbria, and I'm a volunteer coordinator as well. So first of all, I'd like to go over to Julie, please, if that's okay. Julie, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, morning everybody, I'm Julie. I'm a volunteer for the Truro Coroner's Court in Cornwall, and I've been doing that since 2018. And then I joined, as Sam said, the National Helpline back in September 2019 and been volunteering ever since then. As a court volunteer, you get to meet people on the day of the inquest as they're coming up to the end of a process, really. And that process can take several months. And my experiences in court, meeting people who were attending the inquest and hearing their experiences, I just appreciated how much they appreciated being welcomed into court and being supported on the day, even if it was just to point them in the direction of where they could get a cup of coffee or how to use the facilities, etc. But I noticed that sometimes people felt quite unsure on the day and perhaps unprepared for the experience. And that's why I decided to volunteer for the National Helpline, because I thought it would be really good to be involved in helping support people at a different stage in the process. And it certainly helped my experience as a court volunteer to speak to people on the helpline who come from different parts of the country and have had different experiences. So that's why I got involved. Over to you, Tony. Oh, sorry, Ruth. Apologies, Ruth.
Hello, I'm Ruth. I volunteer for the Bedfordshire and Luton Court, which is based in the delightful town of Ampthill, which I know Helen will probably tell us more about, as she knows much more of the history of Ampthill than I would know. About 6-7 years ago, I saw a very small advert in our local freebie Sunday paper looking for volunteers for Coroner's Court Support Service, which I'd never heard of. But as I read it, I thought, you know, that appeals, that's something a bit different. So I sat and thought about it for probably 2 or 3 weeks and then rang the contact number, and really the rest is history. So I enjoyed volunteering in the court, and I was also doing some other work as well. But that folded up, and I thought I've got extra time on my hands, just as they announced doing the pilot for the helpline. And I had previous experience working on doing advice work on a helpline. So I thought maybe I've got some transferable skills there. So as Sam was quite rightly saying, we all turned up in York, not knowing what we were letting ourselves in for. And it's just been extremely interesting. I've learned a huge amount, things that I never knew I didn't know. And And that's been it. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time on the helpline. When we finished the pilot scheme, the option was there that we could either continue or not. But I obviously have got quite into the swing of it by then, and it's been good to see how it's developed. So that's me in a nutshell. So over to Helen.
I think I'm next, and I'm also with the Bedfordshire and Luton Court in Ampthill, which is the most gorgeous Georgian town, and our courthouse is a very beautiful modern building, multi-purpose. It's used for citizenships and weddings as well. So it's actually not a sombre court at all, and not lots of dark timber. It's very light and airy. It's a lovely court. I started volunteering in 2013 when the court here opened. I'd been a police volunteer already, and when I saw that the court was moving to Ampthill and I lived just around the corner, I thought, well, maybe there's something that I can do there. And then I saw the ad, as Ruth mentioned, for the Coroner's Court Support Service, and the rest is history. But I missed the first session of the helpline because I was actually abroad and missed the training, but it seemed to be going really well, so I joined as the second batch. Technology was a bit baffling, but we've got to grips with that. But the reason I wanted to volunteer at all was because I was a broadcast journalist for 40 years, and I was based in London, but I travelled a lot, and I didn't really have anything to do in my local community. I didn't have time. So when I retired, I wanted to embed myself totally in my community and to help locally. And I'd done a couple of stints of jury service, so I was absolutely fascinated by the administration of justice. So I thought Coroner's Court would be an interesting way to serve my community and to use the little legal knowledge that I had. And so that was why I volunteered, and I have to say I found it the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And it's now over to Tony.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, mine was a sort of a community response as well. I'm based in Northallerton, in North Yorkshire, so I'm the furthest north of everybody, apart from Sam, I think. And we always get on everybody else coming from the south, but that's beside the point. But I retired 4 years ago as a GP, and that's why I wanted to continue doing something within the community here. And I think Sam put an article in our local paper with Derek Winter, who's the Assistant Chief Coroner, about setting up a Coroner's Court Support Service around here. My wife wanted me to get me out of the house more than stay around, so she pointed me in the direction, and the rest is history on that side of things. And then Sam persuaded me that with my telephone skills, etc., I should join the helpline, and so I eventually went to a training scheme in Birmingham, of all places, and sort of progressed from there. Recently, since the coronavirus, I've been working as an additional medical examiner in our trust, and that's given me some extra skills and hopefully some expertise, passing on to the rest of the team, because that's what we do. We work as a team. Yes, we have individuals phoning us up, but if we're ever stuck, I know I can always phone Helen, Ruth, or whatever, and get some further answers and things. So hopefully we can answer the people's questions when they come in. Maybe not straight away, but we'll get back to you. And Lucy.
Thanks, Tony. Hello, I'm Lucy. I'm based in North London. I first joined CCSS back in 2015 when I was actually targeted by Reach Volunteering, who obviously thought my skills matched up to what they were looking for volunteers to work in the courts. I must admit I'd never heard of the charity before, but I was immediately interested because I have a background in law. I worked as a paralegal for over 30 years, but at the same time I had long-term involvement with the National Baby Bereavement Charity. So obviously had a lot of relevant experience both of working on telephone support and dealing with the bereaved. So fascinated by it. I trained in April 2015. I've been in various courts around London. I started in the Inner South Court. I then spent about 3 years in the North London Court. And at the moment, I'm in the East London Court, which I love, but very sadly, in the present situation, haven't seen all the wonderful faces there since sometime in March. When the opportunity to join the helpline came up, when the pilot scheme started in March 2018, I was very keen to join this, partly because I'd had previous experience of this sort of work with a growing charity and was very interested in the actual process of how the pilot would work. So a group of us trained in York over the space of about 3 days, I think. And believe it or not, it snowed. I remember that quite clearly. But York's a beautiful city and we had a wonderful time. And as always, when working with national charities, it's just such a treat to meet people from all over the country. So we piloted the helpline for 6 months. Prior to this, the director of the charity had always been available to take calls from worried families and witnesses who didn't understand the inquest service and wanted advice early on. And my own time in the courts had certainly made me very well aware, as Julie said at the beginning, that we were meeting people very much after the event. I mean, obviously, London is busy and some of the inquests have rather a long run in time. And some of the people that I was meeting were up to 18 months after the death had actually taken place. And when you think about what these people have been going through in that time, the questions they must have had, and also the fact that in a lot of ways it's lives on hold, waiting for this process, anxious about it, waiting for the outcome, uncertain what will happen. So I was very well aware that we really needed to be there at point of sale, as it were, to be able to speak to families from literally when the death first occurred to any stage in leading up through the inquiry and if the case went to inquest. And I was also aware that the needs were huge. It wasn't just about families, it wasn't just about the bereaved. There was a great deal else going on in the courts. The witnesses, sometimes even the lawyers, were confronted with situations that they'd not come across before. And one of the things I found most remarkable that happens time and again, I'm sure all colleagues will agree with me, is young police officers coming along to inquests. Now, in my mind, they have already faced unimaginable horrors. They've possibly found the body, they've possibly had to break bad news to families, and yet they would come along to court the first time they'd had to do such a thing in their best uniforms, really anxious about the experience and worried what they should call the coroner and how they should address her or him. So I learned a lot about what the requirements are. It's not always the people you think will be the most needing of help or want to engage with you even, that is necessarily who you come across. So it's been absolutely fascinating experience all the way through. Delighted that the helpline was able to continue after its initial pilot. It's gone from strength to strength with increasing volunteer team, new people joining, and we're just learning all the time. And one of the things I feel I've most learned about is referral to other agencies, which sounds a bit official, but really this is how we signpost people on for whatever other concerns they may have. Because obviously we're going to talk to them about the legalities, about the inquest process, what to expect in court, and also through our new team of telephone support service volunteers, give them some information about their local court on the ground, which is very useful as well. But at the same time, they're experiencing all kinds of other difficulties, be they practical or emotional, and they have to go on living after the inquest, and there'll be a whole other set of issues for them to face then. So it's been hugely rewarding to learn about an ever-growing number of other agencies and charities that we can refer people on to, some of them quite small and local, which I think is particularly meaningful to people in their local communities, but covering a wide range of issues, from the rather obvious ones like the practical and financial issues surrounding bereavement, the really overarching issues like suicide, but also many nuanced areas of child bereavement, babies, young children, how to support teenagers who are bereaved, where a teenager's died in a family, how it affects siblings. There are so many different areas where so many different support agencies can step up, perhaps when our role has ended. So that's been one of the most rewarding things, and we're learning all the time. And obviously, during my experiences in London, I've also been able to go to the City of London Court, which is a little bit unusual in itself in the area that it covers. I've also been part of one of the larger inquests into the Tunisia Beach murders, which was held at the Royal Courts of Justice. And I know other colleagues have been involved in the London Bridge and Westminster Bridge inquests, and even currently some of our volunteers are involved in the Manchester Arena inquiry. So it's been so rewarding. And one thing about telephone support is that you can always get in a private space with people, and it gives them time and the opportunity to talk about what they really want to talk about. So let's hope we can keep on growing the helpline, keep learning, and go from strength to strength. Back to Sam.
Lovely, Lucy. Thank you very much. So following on from Lucy's comments there, we're just going to have a little chat about the kind of calls the helpline gets and how many calls we've taken, that kind of thing. So Julie, would you like to tell us a little bit about what you've been doing?
Yeah, I think Lucy's led into that really, really well. Thank you, Lucy. And we get a massive range of calls on the helpline in my experience, and quite a wide range of different people who find us and call us. Mostly, I think in my experience, it's family members, but certainly not exclusively that. So we take calls from police officers, from medical practitioners, from lawyers, care providers, social workers, funeral directors, almost anybody who comes across our service and gives us a call. And it's about us, doing what we can really to help and answer their questions. Although we mainly get calls from within the UK, we have had calls, and we do get calls from people calling from outside the UK. Sometimes it might be that they've had contact from their local police about a bereavement of a family member in the UK, and they've got our number and they're ringing up to say, I don't know what's happening, can you help? And so it's a question of starting to try and find out the right information for them and helping them. The reasons that people call us also vary. One of our main roles is to provide information to anybody who's calling. So that can be anything from as simple as providing a telephone number or an email address for a correct contact for the coroner. It could be, and quite a lot of it can be, helping to explain what happens why a death is referred to the coroner, and what happens from that point onwards in terms of the process for investigating. What happens in court when the inquest takes place, what the family members are entitled to see by way of documentation before they get to the inquest, and what rights they have when they get to the inquest. A lot of that has, I suppose, over the last few months has been a sort of changeable information that we've been providing, because the courts have had to adjust to the impact of COVID. So we've been trying to keep up to speed with those changes across courts. But it can, as I say, it can be about simply providing information, and a broad range of information. As colleagues have already said, we're learning all the time. We're finding out more information all the time. And the more you learn, the more you're able to give people additional information that may not even have called for in the first place, but it helps them in terms of taking things forward. I think another important part of our role is simply to listen. In my experience, sometimes people, when they're calling, they're not entirely sure why they're calling. It sounds an odd thing to say, but they're ringing because they found the number, and they're not quite sure even when you answer the call what it is that they want to say to you. Sometimes people say, I don't really know where to start. And so an important thing that we do is to listen to the people who are calling us, who've taken the trouble to find our number and to ring us, and just to hear what they have to say. And I think an important part of the role is just understanding that sometimes people just want you to listen, and let them tell them something about their experience. And as a helpline volunteer, then it's important for us to make sure that what we're doing is within what we're providing, what we're experienced to provide. We're not a counselling service. We're there to provide information, advice and support, and then, as Lucy was describing, to help people to find the specialist advice and support that they might need appropriate to the call that they've made. Our calls to the helpline have really increased over the time that we've been in place. So although I wasn't a volunteer at the time, I understand that calls initially were maybe around 40 calls a month to start with. And certainly when I joined in September 2019, that was probably still around where we were, fairly sort of around that sort of mark. But we've been taking significantly more calls this year. And in the last 4 months, we've averaged about 125 calls a month. So that's an incredible increase, I think, since we got going. And certainly, we're going to talk a little bit more later, I think, about the work we did with PMART in April and May, which was a specific response to the pandemic. And during the time that we were supporting in that role, we dealt with over 3,000 contacts. So every shift is different on the helpline in terms of who calls, where they're calling from, the type of information and support they require. And as Lucy said, we're learning all the time and developing our services all the time. Over to Tony.
Thank you. Because the reason Julie's passed it on to me is because, and Lucy's mentioned it, we're always learning. And but initially we've all been through some sort of training to get to where we are. And I can't commend enough Sam and the team at the Coroner's Court Support about the trainings schedules that they provide for us. Helen, I think, mentioned the technology side of things. Yes, we're all technophobes, there's no doubt about it, but we're managing, we're muddling, we're getting through. And it is interesting because we're helpline, but we're out the whole of England. We're all in our individual houses, and we have to be able to communicate with each other easily. And the way we do it, I think, works as well as it can do. There's no doubt about it. We obviously have to be confidential when we're talking to people, and hopefully people will realise we are confidential. But we're confidential within the team, and obviously because sometimes we have to ask various other people what's going on, how to process various different things. Yes, confidential is never broken, but at the end of the day, we have to learn all these processes. It is interesting. We do work as a team. There's no doubt about it, and we work very closely together. And I think we've probably become closer together over the past 6 or 7 months. Not least of which April, May, June time, when obviously the height of the pandemic and COVID, our roles changed to a certain extent, and we were having weekly team meetings by Zoom. Yes, we've become technologically proficient in Zoom meetings, and I think we've actually even got to know each other a lot better. We occasionally met each other every sort of 2 to 3 months in locations throughout the country, and we spent an hour or so in each other's company, and it was really good. But at the end of the day, these Zoom meetings, we've got to know each other's personalities as well, good and bad. Going back to the training is good. There's no doubt about it. As Lucy said, we've had it's usually over 2 or 3 days, and usually in locations central. But I believe there have been some training sessions done over Zoom. And I'm sure they're as appropriate and equally as good. I have to mention role play because role play does get mentioned all the time. I hate doing role play. But yes, I suppose it is an important part of the training process. But never mind, we've all done that. What else is there? I think it's the team spirit that we all have that comes through. And hopefully when people do phone up the helpline, it is important that they appreciate, yes, they're speaking to an individual, but yes, we are all part of a team. I think one of the things that we do get calls from everybody and everybody. The only person I've never taken a call from is a coroner. but I don't know if anybody else has. But certainly, I think I've found over the months that I've been on the helpline, the past sort of 18 months or so, it's so different in every single area. There's lots of similarities, but unfortunately, it's a bit of a postcode lottery about how coronial services work in each individual area, and that's why I think having a team throughout the whole country is very important. I think that's all I've got to say really at the moment, but I think we're going to have a chat about types of things that we hear. Is that right, Sam?
We are, Tony. Thank you very much. That's excellent. So we're just going to have a little look at a couple of case studies, obviously abiding by confidentiality. So ladies and Tony, do you have anything that springs to mind, cases that you've dealt with over the telephone? Anybody like to start?
Well, should I just continue? Because, that's right. I mean, one of the ones that, and I think Lucy picked up on this, really, it was a few months ago now. And in fact, it was quite a senior police person who was involved. But interestingly, they were involved as the bereaved. And it was very interesting talking to them how they were perceiving what the inquest was all about. Now, I know that this police person had been to court as a witness, had been through the processes and etc., but was completely perplexed about how to cope with the problem that was facing them. And I think that for me was interesting, and has actually led me to because of my medical background as well, having been to court and seeing people of medical nursing professions as witnesses, and they don't do themselves justice in many ways, don't help themselves, don't help the families, don't help the coroner. And at the end of the day, my plan is at the moment, as Sam is aware, certainly locally, we're going to try and take some junior doctors into court just to act as observers in court and see what the process is all about, and hopefully help them to help themselves in the future. But just going back to the calls taken, that was one particular example that led me to think, you know, you're on the wrong side almost, and you just don't know what to do.
I think it is difficult, Tony, as you say. Professional witnesses, when they come along, we've all have an expectation, or we did have, that they will know the inquest process, how to give evidence, what's appropriate to say and what isn't. And I think it's a fantastic idea. I think that as part of an induction to all professional services, people should attend an inquest, just to observe the process, as it were. And I would really advise anybody that's joining a profession to do so. Lovely, thank you, Tony. Anybody else got anything that they want to add? Helen?
I remember a case that I had from a carer who rang in. She'd been asked to be a witness. It was a very sad case actually, because she had seen the carer working for a private company. The person had actually died, unfortunately, shortly after her visit, and the care company was blaming her. And they weren't supplying her, even though she'd been working for them at the time. They weren't actually supplying her with any legal aid, whereas the company itself was being legally represented. So she was out on a limb on her own, and she was absolutely terrified, and she was quite convinced they were going to blame her. And she was really upset when she rang the helpline, and we were able to reassure her that the family is at the heart of the inquest indeed, but that the coroner will be very keen to make sure that that the questions to her are not questions of blame, because it's not a court of blame, and that she actually had the right to have her company represent her, even though she wasn't working for them anymore. And the coroner had to actually intervene and say she had to have legal representation provided by the company. And that was an interesting development for her. She was very gratified.
I can imagine she was, Helen. Yeah, sometimes just talking to people, talking to us as it were on the helpline, just to allay their fears is the most important thing. There must be, dreading going. As you said, it's not a court of blame. A lot of people don't understand that that's the fact, as it were. And when we say that, even in the court situation, when you say that to somebody face to face, you can actually see them visibly relaxing, can't you, that they're not going to be on trial, as it were. So yeah, thank you very much, Helen. Anybody else got anything to add? Shall we move on to the next little bit then? So we're going to talk about the PMART service. So ladies and Tony, can you remember what the PMART service stands for? Shall I tell you? Because I know that we're going to talk about it. The Pandemic Multi-Agency Response Team. And we began this assistance at the beginning of lockdown. So it happened on a Wednesday evening. I was up here in my little office and I got a telephone call from a senior coroner in London area. And she said, would our helpline volunteers be able to help take some calls, which we'll go on to in a second. And I said, of course they would, because I knew that you would all jump at the opportunity, and you really, really did. It was absolutely brilliant. So within 24 hours, if you remember, we actually mobilised, and it just went from there. So ladies, would you like to take it away? What do we do next?
And I think I was one of the first responders to that on the Thursday, and we'd only just been told that we were doing that, and the phone rang off the hook. It was absolutely manic. And I remember we had a team meeting by Zoom a couple of days afterwards, and I said, one person per shift is not enough. And there were 9 of us at the time, and we were trying to cover 4 3-hour shifts a day, 7 days a week, 9 people. And when we realized one person on shift was not enough, we needed a second. Well, obviously 2 times 4 times 7 out of 9 does not go. So we very quickly had to recruit some more helpers, because it was really, really busy and stressful as well. And I know that I was putting myself on shifts when there was a gap in the roster, and I probably took on too much. And I know if it wasn't for the help of Ruth, who's one of my colleagues here in Ampthill, and Sam, I probably would have climbed the wall. But it was a really rewarding thing to be doing.
Just interrupting, Helen, her word of the pandemic really was overwhelming. And that's exactly what it was when we first started. But I can always get crossed with people when it's nothing to do with me. And I did interfere, Helen, by telling you were doing too much at one point. And I think you actually paid attention to me.
I can remember that. Sorry to interrupt again, but I can remember my first shift. I wasn't rotated, I think, at the very beginning. And I can remember looking at the rota and thinking, crikey, we have got a lot to cover, and putting myself on shift. But also the first person that I spoke to on my shift was Ruth. I took over from Ruth, and I was very nervous, even though I'd been doing the helpline for a few months. It was very different and didn't know quite what to expect. And Ruth and I had a chat as I took over on that particular day. And she said, well, it's a bit different, but I expect we'll get through it. And that was just a really calming thing to say at that moment. And we did. So thank you, Ruth.
My pleasure.
They were very, very different kind of inquiries, because the team that went out, the pandemic, the PMART team that went out, quite often the families had just seen their loved ones taken away, sealed and taken away. They had no idea where they were going. They had no idea what was going to happen now, and they were grieving. And one of the things we had to find out was where the bodies had gone, so which mortuary they'd been taken to. And there were some cases where there were religious requirements to bury them within 24 hours, which clearly could not be met. And a number of cases about traditions that some religions like to perform on the body. I remember having a call from a lady who was a Hindu, and she was really, really upset that they couldn't tie a ribbon around her, it was her father, in fact, her father's toe, because that's the way they send them into the next life. And she was really upset that she wasn't going to be able to do that, and that was something I hadn't known. So it was a very steep learning curve.
It absolutely was, wasn't it? I know that we changed our working practices as well. So our opening hours, we're obviously 9 till 7 Monday to Friday, and 9 till 2 on a Saturday now. During the PMART service, we were 8 till 8, 7 days a week. So, and we at some point we actually had 3 volunteers on duty, because there was that many calls coming in, weren't there? There were so many things to consider. The information was changing on a daily basis. I mean, we were getting calls from bereaved families whose loved ones had literally just just died, literally. And it was very, very difficult, but you all did such an amazing job. You really did. The information we had to learn about registration services, the dreaded CREM4 form. I mean, goodness me, if we didn't have nightmares every single week, our meetings about CREM4 forms, and where, because of the way that the PMART service ran, obviously we had a GP hub that were signing the paperwork, and the PMART service were electronically sending that in there, and there was paperwork missing, so we were getting families phoning up and saying, I need to bury my loved one, but there's some paperwork missing. So we were chasing all that as well at the same time as taking calls from bereaved families. It was really, really difficult and very, very busy. We worked some very long shifts, didn't we? And it was so rewarding as well. We were just to talk to people and just reassure them, because when you're bereaved and grieving, sometimes you don't know what day it is, and literally, like I said, loved ones had just passed away, and there was 3 temporary mortuaries, so that the deceased, the loved one may have been taken to one of them, as Helen said. So we had to find out which one they'd been taken to. People asking us about the coronial service. Would it be referred to a coroner, or could they arrange a cremation or burial? I had a couple of conversations with regards to faith deaths. I remember there was a rabbi phoned me on a Saturday evening asking about this one chap, and they were desperate over the weekend to get this man buried as soon as possible. And the wife rang, the rabbi phoned at least 3 times, and he was chatting to me, and he was wanting the telephone number of the senior coroner. I mean, they did get it organised, but it was really, really difficult for such a lot of people. But obviously, we weren't going anywhere, and it was great to be part of such an amazing service. So thank you very much, ladies.
Sam, it's probably worth mentioning, it wasn't just picking up a telephone. We were getting a lot of email contact as well, weren't we?
We were, Ruth. We absolutely were. Yes. And we do now actually get a lot of email contacts, don't we? Which is good. It's interesting because I had a conversation with a volunteer that was on duty yesterday for a lady whose son's just passed away, and where we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with an amazing man from the Tell Us Once service, if you remember, and he was talking to us about how to use the Tell Us Once service. What was interesting yesterday when I spoke to the volunteer that was on duty, John it was actually, and he was saying that the lady he spoke to didn't have access to, or any friends with internet, Wi-Fi at all. So what would she do? So obviously, luckily, we know, because Michael came to speak to us, we had the Tell Us Once service telephone number. So we obviously gave, John gave her that. She needed to send an email to get in touch with the coroner's office. That's the only contact. They're not taking telephone calls. So obviously, John offered to send an email from the helpline email address and to be the liaison between, and tell the coroner's office that they need to contact the lady. So there's so much to consider in this day and age. In this day and age of electronics, as we all jokingly say that we're really not very tech savvy, but we can actually do the basics, whereas a lot of people don't have access, and I don't think that that's considered. So we can help people get through this process in a slightly different way, obviously, but we can be the intermediary to pass over the information if need be, and then they will make the contact. So okay, yeah. Another thing I wanted to mention as well, the language barriers we faced. Do you remember that in the PMART service? We had to, because we had a lot of out of country, a lot of language barriers, and we had to use the language line on occasion. That was it. But that wasn't until towards the end, was it? So trying to get people's names spelt correctly to pass the information over to the PMART service. Call takers who were local authority employees who were inputting the information, so to get that correct. And obviously, generally, we would use the phonetic alphabet, but people from abroad don't know what our phonetic alphabet means. So obviously, it was very, very difficult at times, and we had to, I think, be careful how we spoke to people as well, because obviously if we don't understand, we tend to raise our voice. That doesn't really help anybody in the long run, does it? So yeah, we learned such a lot, didn't we? Does anybody else want to have anything to say to that before I move on about the TSS?
I think I was only going to add that the learning, it was sort of just in time learning, as you've described it, really, wasn't it? So we were just slightly one step ahead of the person we were trying to help, really. But also, I personally, I felt I learned a lot of information which is broader than what we were doing on the helpline before, which has continued to pay benefits in the calls that we've taken subsequently. And actually, some of the outreach stuff we did later on, where we were contacting relatives who for one reason or another, had not arranged to have their loved one collected from the mortuary, to have a sort of sensitive conversation with them about when they might do that. I thought that was, you know, being able to do that and help to move that on as well. That was another new experience and a good one to be involved in.
It was, Julie. Thank you. Ruth, did you want to say?
Yeah, I think one of the things that surprised me, that with all the traumas that these people were going through, the number of people that actually said thank you and how much they'd appreciated the call. I'm not convinced that I would have readily been remembering to say thank you if I was that fraught with the situation. But that, amongst many other things, made it all worthwhile. But where we were saying about actual case histories, I think if we've got time for me just to explain one that sticks in my mind. It was probably about 7:30 in the evening, and a young, well, he sounded young, police officer rang, wanting to know about somebody who just died, because he was outside the house. And I said, well, I can try and find out what's going on for you. Oh, he said, I really would be grateful. He said, I'll give you my personal mobile number. He said, because until they come to take the deceased from the house, I've got to sit in my police car outside. So he was very impressed when 20 minutes later I phoned and said, you'll be able to go home for your dinner in 15 minutes time. He was pretty jubilant about it. So there were the lighter moments amidst all the very difficult circumstances and the tear-jerking cases that we had as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Yeah, we did help a lot of people, which is great. And as you say, it's lovely when we get thanks, but we don't do it for the thanks. We do it because we care about people, which is the most important thing for us. So thank you. So as time's moving on, we just quickly need to speak about the telephone support service. Who would like to say anything about that? Why have we started the telephone support service?
Because when people come to court, it's usually right at the end, as I think Julie said earlier, it's right at the end of quite a long process. But just after somebody is bereaved, they don't necessarily know what the process is, why a case has been referred to the coroner, what that's going to mean in delay terms, how to register the death, whether to register the death, and especially in view of a lot of offices being closed at the moment and people working from home. So there's a lot of technical things and administrative things that they need to do. How do they get the death certificate? How do they do the tell us once? Where do they get the code from to operate the tell us once? Because we are able to help people at a much earlier stage in the process, we can also then help them perhaps with some information about the local court. And so we can be in touch with a volunteer from the local court who can then call the person, call the caller, and explain the layout of the court, the parking arrangements, you know, what the coroner's procedures normally are, what time they need to get there, how much in advance, sorts of practical things that they need to know before they go to court. But sometimes from earlier on in the process, where do they go from here? What do they now do?
Yeah, I'd echo that, Helen, because I feel that up here in Northallerton, I know what goes on. Well, I hope I know what goes on around here, but what happens in your area, you know, or happens down in Truro, etc., you know, sometimes is beyond me to remember. So by having the telephone support service is going to be, I'm sure, invaluable to me, never mind to everybody else, and the people are calling in, because we can give them the local information. Because as I hinted at earlier on, you know, coronial service, yes, it's a national service, but at the end of the day, there is so many differences and variances around the country about it all. And to have the local knowledge is excellent, and that goes back to the teams again, really, in many ways, and where we can signpost people to appropriately and things. I think one of the questions that often does come up, and I've had several examples, is regarding the early stages of the inquest process, is who actually is the person of interest. And very often we can actually guide people. At the end of the day, it's the coroner who makes that decision if somebody is a person of interest. But very often I've had calls where people hadn't even heard that they could be potentially the person of interest. Then they could get all the disclosures, and then they can get the appropriate way forward in the inquest, and then the end of the inquest process for themselves. So I mean that sometimes has been very useful.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Yeah, we've just spent the last 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, training 120 court volunteers to undertake this new service. We've always done it, and we, as you'll all know, being helpline volunteers, we've always had people asking about local court support and arranged it on occasion in areas that we sometimes even don't have a volunteer service for. We've got some really kind court volunteers who might go to the next jurisdiction, as it were, as just a supporter. So this is something that we think is very, very important and quite excited about it. So hopefully we will get a lot more referrals coming in, so we can speak to people at a lot earlier process. A lot earlier in the process. So yeah, thank you very much. So Helen, how do people make a referral to the telephone support service?
Well, there are several ways they can do that. They can ring the helpline in the first place. They can fill in an online, it's on our website. There is a heading at the top, practitioners, which is a form they can fill in. There's also a chat line on the website. Right at the very, very, very bottom is a little purple circle with a chat, like an inverted comma. And they can email, to helpline@ccss.org.uk. And they bring the helpline, which telephone number I haven't given. None of us have given. It's that's a good point. What is our phone number? Why can't I remember?
0300 111 2141.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen and Tony. When we've got a referral, do you want to take us through what happens next? Is that okay?
Yes, it's obviously this service is in its infancy still, so there may be some fine tuning needed to what we actually do when we get the information. But obviously things must be dealt with in a confidential way. So if the helpline has a referral, we need to check out with the caller that it's okay to give their information through to a local volunteer. Then, having got that permission, you get in touch with the local volunteer who sets up a phone meeting. They, having spoken within 72 hours, is that the right window of opportunity?
Yeah.
They do and answer any questions about that they need from the locality. They then get back to the helpline volunteer, who may not be the same person that referred the first time round. I'm probably making this sound unnecessarily complicated, but it actually isn't, because we maintain confidential records. So whoever picks up the return call from the local volunteer will just be able to update if there's any work to be done around things going on. I dealt with one myself last week where the local volunteer said that the person that she'd spoken to would really appreciate a hard copy of the instructions of what goes on in the court. So that's the sort of thing that on the helpline we would be picking up and dealing with and emailing out to the original caller, or putting in the post if they don't have email. So that's how we're hoping it's going to work, and it will work very smoothly. But as I say, like anything else, it will be reviewed and we may need to fine tune things, which I know will be done very easily, won't they, Sam?
They will indeed, Ruth, they will indeed. We do try. So the last little bit, thank you, Ruth. Tony, would you like to tell people again our helpline hours and how to contact us?
Yeah, it's most days of the week, though we do have bank holidays off and Sundays, and it's Monday to Friday 9 AM to 7 PM, and on Saturdays 9 AM to 2 PM. And as the telephone number, as I said before, is 0300 111 2141. And we have an email, which is helpline@ccss.org.uk. And as Helen quite kindly reminded me, we have a chat function, I haven't actually used that chat function myself yet, but I'm sure I'll get a handle of it, and which is on the website.
Lovely, thank you, Tony. Thank you, everybody. You've been amazing as always. You're an amazing team and you do great work. So Tom, I'm going to hand over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. Such an informative session. It was really, like I said, really interesting to hear what, the types of calls that you take, but also, the case studies, the fantastic piece of work that was the PMART. It was really useful to hear about that, and will definitely give all the viewers a clear idea of what the helpline does and what's involved with the role. So thank you for that. No questions have come in, so I'm putting that down to the fact that it was such a comprehensive session. You've covered everything, so that's great. Thank you very much. And I just want to say thank you. It's clear to see you're an asset to the organisation. You deliver some really important support, and also it really comes across that you're a close-knit team as well. So thank you. That was a really good session. That was really good. So for those who are watching, if you do want to make a donation to help us continue deliver our helpline support, you can do that on the website, www.coronerscourtsupportservice.org.uk/donate. Next up is Mike cooking his mince pies, which is starting in about 10 minutes time. So we'll give people opportunity to go and grab a drink, get your ingredients ready, and we'll see you back on the YouTube channel at 11:45. Thank you.